Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our September meeting. First of all, look at the fire regs. If there's no nothing planned for tonight, to my knowledge. So if the alarm does go, please make your way up to the top car park. Moving on to the main agenda, item number 1, apologies and absence. Tommy.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillors Bull, Archer, Cruz, Raw and Councillor Swindle.
Thank you. Item number 2, approval of the previous minutes. Like a seconder. First, all those in favour? I'll sign those later. Okay. Item number 3, public participation. No, thank you very much. Item number 4, any interest? No? Okay, and moving on to the main items of the agenda, item number 5, risk management annual report 21-22. Paul, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, members, the Council's risk management policy and strategy approved by this committee in March of 2021 does require me to report to members by way of an annual report on the Council's risk management arrangements and how the key strategic risks across the organisation are being managed. That's the very purpose of this particular report, which seeks to identify the risk management processes and working practices that we have in place, and it provides Council with that insight into the current risk exposure. By way of explanation, the Council operates a risk management programme whereby risks are associated with the corporate plan, key strategic objectives, and also individual service plans. And the key actions regarding those risks are assessed at 2 particular levels. The first level is strategic risks, i.e. those risks which will significantly impact upon the Council in its ability to deliver on its strategic objectives and corporate plan. And then at a second level, operational risks, which are those which apply and impact upon the delivery of services at that operational level. In terms of the process that we go through, we do assess risks on a regular basis through the Risk Continuity Group, which in turn reports to the corporate leadership team, basically ensuring that any risks are properly assessed, challenged and reported effectively, and clearly that then filters into the annual report which I'm delivering to you this evening. So in terms of the actual detail, the chart at paragraph 2.3 of the report currently identifies that the Council has 14 risks on its strategic risk register. It also shows that the 5 highest scoring risks are currently financial resilience, followed by cybercrime, service continuity, legal challenge and resource capacity and capability. Furthermore, the table at paragraph 2.4 shows that 2 of the strategic risks have actually been moved from medium risk to high risk in 2022, these being legal challenge and service continuity, which have been increased from medium to high risk. This is effectively a reflection of the current operational environment that we are facing and the challenges posed mainly by external factors. But I'm happy to take any questions in regard to the detail of the report, Chair.
Yes, and thank you very much for the report, Paul. I have to say, I did equate this in my mind with recent discussions that I've taken part in with you over your thoughts about organisational restructuring. And of course, I couldn't help but make that connection. I want to ask you 2 questions, if I may. One specific, just if you would, to give me a little bit more information without breaching any confidentiality about where you are assessing there being legal challenges arising. I do recall in the past that we've had some anxieties about planning, for example, but it may be that you've got them in mind at other areas. I wouldn't like to feel that we were on a path that is going to take us into the courts, if that's not being too dramatic. My general question is really, I suppose, linked to, if you like, the use of language within your report um, about risks and challenges, and whether what we're in the council is in a position at the moment where we're not achieving to the best of our ability, or is it really that we are, as I say, that not to put too fine a point on it, that things are getting worse. So it's just a general comment about this atmosphere of risk that you have, I think, quite rightly accented. And as I say, we are looking at that, as I understand it. There's a report in council, isn't there, that is hoping to take forward measures to try and address this. And then that specific point about legal challenge.
Like to answer that, Paul?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, in terms of resources and capacity, you're quite right, Councillor Radcliffe, there is a report which some members might not have had a chance to see yet on the council meeting for next week. So hopefully that will become clearer once we get to that particular point. But in terms of legal challenges, I think this is very much a reflection of the market that we're in, whereby we're seeing increasing costs pretty much in every activity or contract that we're engaging with. We've obviously got very high rates of inflation, which are increasing. We've got an increase in the Bank of England base rate today, which is going to also have an impact on the people that we deal with. And the energy costs, that is a huge risk, not just to this organisation, but also some of the partners that we also support. So whilst at the moment there is no significant legal challenges underway, I think the increase in the risk factor here is highlighting the fact that we could find ourselves in a situation whereby contracts start to fail because of the operating environment that we're in. And it's a question of managing and trying to mitigate the risk of that failure and making sure that we've got the appropriate strategies in place to deal with it. So I can't point you to any particular example. I don't think you've got reason to be unduly concerned at the moment, but it's certainly something that we need to be very much aware of.
Thanks, Chair. Well, the only real concern I have is on the very first two topics, which are financial resilience and resource capacity and capability. And you can see that we've far exceeded the target level. So that brings me to think, you know, it raised questions about how do we benchmark? Why are the targets set so low? And yes, we may have achieved quite a lot to get the score, but nowhere in the report that I can see tells me exactly how we got that score. If you work out the number of items, which we do, there's no logical explanation how many points you get for doing certain things. So it's all around benchmarking, target setting, and really, if we only achieved, like on the first one, the target score was 12, what would we lose? What would we not doing if we only achieved the target? So emphasis needs to be put on the extra things that we're doing to give us some thought about why we are doing well on those issues. That's basically it. It's how we do it. And I remember reading on one paragraph saying that councillors should have an understanding of how we go around risk assessment. To my knowledge, that's the type of thing I would like to know, rather than some of the training that we've embarked on, which hasn't really helped. But knowing how we operate is one of the major factors of member development. Thank
Would you like
you.
to respond to that, Paul?
On that last point, I think that's a very fair comment, Councillor Flitter, and that's something we can pick up as part of the member induction programme, which will be developed as part of the new intake of council from May onwards. In terms of how we benchmark, it's very difficult for us to benchmark against other councils because clearly every council is unique. They'll have different operating arrangements and so on and so forth. But the best benchmark that we can take is the reports that we get from the auditors. And you'll recall that when Mazars came and gave their opinion in terms of the council's financial stability, notwithstanding the external challenges that exist and the uncertainties, particularly around the future funding mechanisms that the government may put in place for local government, we are in I would say, a stable position. We are certainly not at risk like some councils around us are in terms of our financial stability. But the key thing is, and the reason why this has scored particularly highly on the risk scoring, is because that level of uncertainty is continuing, and with the financial pressures that we are now seeing come through regarding inflation and energy costs and pay awards for local government staff, they are far outstripping the provisions that we've set aside, because none of which we are experiencing could really have been anticipated. So what this is really highlighting is the fact that we need to be cautious and prudent moving forward, because unless there is a significant increase in the local government settlement towards the end of this year, then as Karen's previously advised members, we will be looking at possibly implementing a savings plan. The precise extent of that we don't yet know, but we are already starting to think about what that might look like, such that we are prepared. So the whole issue regarding financial stability, yes, it's okay at the moment, but there are clouds on the horizon.
Can I just come back on that, Jack?
You can.
Basically, there's two factors which are scored. One of them is the likelihood of a failure, if you like, scored at 1 to 5, and then the second one is the impact of that failure on the council, again scored at 1 to 5. So basically, it's a simple calculation of impact against likelihood.
Councillor O'Brien.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I'm looking at Appendix 1, page 19, the mitigating actions relating to continuity of service. So two questions on that. Can you tell me if there are any particular issues relating to the building control contract, which you refer to there? And the second question, the reference to temporary measures outside the terms and conditions of the waste management contract. Can you elaborate on what is meant by that? And given that we're now halfway through the year to which this mitigation plan applies, when do you envisage the council being asked?
Paul, can you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, in regard to the building control contract, no, there are no concerns regarding that. The building control arrangement that we have is working very well. The council actually received a dividend this year, which was greater than we'd anticipated. But there is an issue just to review the contract that is in place across the various partner organisations. So that's what that is referring to. It's a technical aspect rather than a significant operational risk. In terms of the temporary measures outside terms and conditions of waste management, that's referring to the additional financial support that council approved. When was it? Beginning of summer? Was it end of last year? There's a package of proposals, if you recall, regarding uplift for HGV salaries, additional support to get through the challenges that we faced at that particular time. So whilst those arrangements are still in place, the full financial support package which was approved by the council hasn't actually been needed, and members will be receiving an update on that hopefully at the November council meeting.
Councillor Murphy?
These are not new temporary measures. These
No,
are
These are the ones that members,
confirmation of existing.
yes,
Okay.
those are the measures that members have previously approved.
Councillor Murphy? With your name down? Oh. I beg your pardon. Sorry, it's the leader. Paul. Gary, yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
my writing's gone astray. Gary.
Thank you, Paul. I've wondered where the impact of COVID is in relation to risk management, because obviously much of our resilience depends on staffing levels, and the ability to respond to any crises. So first question is, how often does the risk management group meet? And if one of these goes off the charts, to give us real cause for concern, presumably bring a report back to council. But I just wondered how and if COVID should play a part in this risk management, because it's a great risk.
I'll respond, Paul.
Yes, Chair. In terms of how often the group meets, it meets every 2 months. But any immediate risks which are brought to our attention through service managers will come to CLT pretty much immediately. So you don't necessarily wait for 2 months before you find out there's a big problem. In terms of COVID, I think the honest answer is that the impact of COVID is still having an impact on the organisation, as we are trying to catch up on what in effect has been 2 years lost by having to divert significant resources to deal with the pandemic itself. And this feeds into my report at council next week on resilience and resources, because that report really does bring out what the views of some of the senior managers are, and that pressure is there, and it is having an impact. And I think that's why it's even more important that we're clear moving forward what our priorities are.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Any more questions? No? I'll move to debate then.
I'll move the report, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second. I'd like to thank Karen for this report. And you can look at how do you get these scores and benchmark and all the rest of it. But, it's quite straightforward when you look at the red, and you look at the score and the target score. It's quite clear for members to look at. And I applaud our council for its honesty in, just presenting that to us. So thank you. I'm happy to second.
Okay. Moving on to item number 6, Equality Consultation Engagement Plan 22-24.
Thank you.
Liz.
Thank you very much. This report was carried over from July, so some of the references refer to the current financial year, but we've kind of moved it on a little bit further. So the context of this is the Equality Act and the Public Sector Equality Duty, which require us to publish equality data, which we do annually in January every year. But we also have to include equality objectives and our plans for achieving those objectives and report them to you. We also have a duty to consult with residents and demonstrate that we have done so. Both of the plans, the equality plan and the consultation plan, basically are our evidence that we are doing these things. So one of the things that we do a lot of to show that we are meeting the requirements of the Equality Act, and to some extent the consultation requirements, are that we do equality impact assessments on any new policy or service or any change to a service. And I think a lot of elected members in here have done the training, so I won't go on too much about those. We have achieved an awful amount of EIAs, really pleased about that. This is dynamic. We try to get all of the EIAs into the plans as early as possible, but obviously as the council changes its business, new projects emerge, we add EIAs on. So that's where we've reported a number that we'd planned, but we've also completed, looks like about another 15 or so on top of that. So, for example, we've done EIAs on the antisocial behaviour policy, flexible working policy, some of the COVID-related ones which we couldn't have predicted. So, for example, the test and trace payments, opening and closing of toilets, and so on. So the ones that we've completed are on page 45, if you would like to have a look at those. And we've got quite a lot of EIAs planned as well. And you can see those on page 32 in the actual report themselves. So we're going to be looking at things like the text payment systems, live streaming of council meetings, some of the outcomes of the Clean and Green review, the PSBO, park surveys, and so on. As I say, we might end up with more on that list by the time we've reached the end of that plan, because we never know what's going to emerge. Okay, so some of the successes we can see from both of the plans are on page 30. And some of the ones I wanted to pick out really were the successes that we had around things like the retrofitting, the external insulation refitted to homes, and we had 100% of respondents would recommend that service that we carried out. So I think that that's a really good piece of work and a good piece of consultation to have done. We did exceed the target to provide adaptations to the homes of people with disabilities in 2021. We delivered the Equality and Diversity Training Programme for members and senior managers, repeated that a couple of times. We've done that on Zoom and we've done that on face-to-face as well. And just trying to think what else. Oh, consultation on the proposed empty home premium was really good as well. And that was promoted online and by a letter. We received responses from owners of empty home as well as residents who live in areas where there are perhaps higher levels of empty homes than in others. So that was good. I think our consultation is improving and we're doing more and more of it, especially since COVID finished. So it's great to see that these activities are coming on stronger, really. We also had some community forums. We reviewed the council car parking order. And one of the best things that came from the residents survey that we did last year was over 95% of residents in the survey in both 2020 and 21 said they feel safe outside of their homes both day and night, which I think again is something that's probably quite rare for a lot of councils. So I think that's a good indicator for us. There were some things that we didn't meet, mostly because of COVID. So either the situation changed, so we didn't meet with businesses during COVID. We didn't have business forums in that respect, as we had planned, because it was COVID. We had issues with some consultation that wasn't carried out by Serco. Again, we've got all the issues. We all know what happened with Serco and COVID. So although we didn't achieve some things, generally it wasn't down to us. It was down to external circumstances that we didn't actually achieve things. So for next couple of years, the kind of things that we've got planned, as I said, there's quite a lot of equality impact assessments. We'll be doing resident surveys as well, and some of that is going to feed into the development of the next corporate plan, 2024 to 28. We are going to be looking at conditions and outcomes for private landlords and tenants as well. So another piece of consultation where we're going to be looking at sort of all round an issue. And those results are going to be informing policy proposals to improve conditions and outcomes for the tenants and for the landlords. Lots of community engagement. We've already done some community engagement on climate change. I think that was in the park in Matlock 2 weeks ago, I think that was. And that was very well supported, very well received. We're working with community groups about biodiversity projects, the Verges and so on. We're going to be doing consultation on budgets. We've got a big piece of consultation that's being done into businesses as well, and that's in development at the moment. Areas around equality that we've got in the plans will be to carry on doing annual online panel surveys. We're going to be looking at, and this is not my area, it's about fully utilising the refuse collection vehicle in-cab software that links Serco and the customer service system together. So I understand that's going to make it much more speedily if someone has an issue with their waste, particularly if it's someone with a disability or another protected characteristic that we perhaps need to make extra special care to meet their needs. We're going to be looking at delivering the Sustainable Warmth Grant funding, provision of security equipment for victims and survivors of domestic abuse. And I think we're looking at some training as well around those areas. And we're supporting some projects, diversionary projects. I think that's linked to the antisocial behaviour type policy and activities, working with some young people. And we've got a couple of business events planned. I think that's about what I wanted to say, really. Steve, happy? Yep.
Members' questions? Councillor
Yeah, I'll start, Chair, just by saying I thought it was just the Chief Executive and all members who had such a comprehensive overview of the operation of the council. But when I read this report and realised how wide and diverse the involvement of equality is, quite naturally, I realised that we've got somebody else who has this very wide involvement in the operation of the council, and is not, constrained, as it were, but he's able to influence across a huge range of activity going on in the council. My question is really about the objectives that I know that we agreed at this committee. I wonder if Liz, just for my interest, and I'm sure probably members as well, you could give me some specifics about how equality has aided the development of housing and the needs of our residents in the district. Have there been occasions when there has been a report, a planning application, that you have been able to make comment on to try to put pressure to see that that application actually goes further along in actually either properly addressing, shall we say, the needs of disabled, or takes good and due regard to design and energy efficiency requirements. I'm making this really because I think it's one of the major challenges for this council, is to see that the housing development that we approve and we push for is of the very highest standard. And if we can get departments like yours to add into that, so much the better.
Yes, I think
Would you like to respond to that?
right. So, sorry, I think you're absolutely right. I'd probably have to defer to Steve really in terms of planning applications. I've not been asked specifically to get involved in any of the planning projects. However, my colleagues that work in planning are fully aware of the equality requirements, and I do get queries from time to time of a more general nature. But Steve, would you, I don't know if you have anything else to add?
Not a great deal, other than to add that Elizabeth is correct that the planning applications aren't normally subject to formal EIAs, although Elizabeth's input is sometimes sought. The areas where we have though achieved some successes in this regard, I think on page 40 of the report there's a number, and Elizabeth has referred to some of them already, such as the adaptations of properties for disabled people, and the debt advice that's given to support low-income people as well. And I know if Rob Coggins were here, he'd be telling you a lot about some of the affordable houses that he's produced that are actually to higher standards and of better standard for disabled people. But in terms of more general figures, I haven't got any other information, sorry.
Thank you, Steve.
Allow me, Chair. I think one of the reasons I've mentioned this is because I feel Liz's department can play a very active, proactive role and not just respond. So often when you read the equalities commentary after, you're thinking to yourself, maybe this is just a reaction to what is being proposed. But if it can be proactive, so much the better. Incidentally, if I can just lead on to something else that I know I wanted to mention, is to express my disappointment in two particular areas. One is the outcome of satisfaction for leisure services at 70%. And the other one relates to what I've just been talking about, is just the 15% of affordable housing development that took place over the previous 12 months that covered by this report. 15%. I mean, we are supposed to have a target of 30. I know it's aspirational, but nevertheless, 15% seems to be suggesting that somehow or other we need to tighten our grip when it comes to affordable housing.
Councillor O'Brien. It's all right, carry on.
Thank you, Chair. I find much to commend in this report, and much the council can be proud and satisfied of. But I've got 4 questions I'd be interested in your answer to, Elizabeth. First is, I don't see any reference in the report, excuse me if I've missed it, but I don't see any reference to equality and diversity of the council's workforce, nor of the council itself, actually. So I'm interested in whether our equality plan does make any reference to those issues in respect of the council and the workforce. Second question, I receive a fair number of grumbles and actually formal complaints from people using the car parks in both Bakewell and Harvestidge about the pay and park facility, or more specifically, the ring and park facility, the use of mobile phones for parking. It's normally on behalf of older users of the car parks who find great difficulty in manipulating that application process, and quite honestly feel embarrassed and awkward at the difficulty they have in paying. Now, as far as I can see, there was no EIA undertaken in respect of that particular aspect of car parking management. So I'd be interested in your comment on that, and whether you think it's appropriate that as part of our consultation on equality, perhaps the committee might recommend that the group that's looking at car parking policy also addresses that aspect specifically. You've referred to Serco and their non-compliance with what they were required to do in terms of engagement, and you make a reference to the fact there doesn't appear to be any confirmation that they're going to undertake their required survey this year. So what is the contingency plan if they continue to not commit to undertaking that satisfaction survey? And lastly, something else I do regularly is to talk to the stall holders at Bakewell Monthly Farmers Market. And they have a number of, as you would expect, some of the comments are positive, some are less positive, and I relay these to our officers. Now, I note that you have in the engagement a proposal to engage with the stall market stall holders at Bakewell this year. I was going to suggest you might think it, given the changing nature of Bakewell Farmers Market, which I think is acknowledged by officers, you might think it also appropriate to formally engage with the stall holders at the farmers market as well as the stall market. Thank
Would
you,
you like to
Chair.
respond, Liz?
The first one was about the diversity of the workforce, and we publish those separately every year in January as the equality data, and we're required to do that and put them on the website. So we look at gender pay caps as well. So all of that, we look at gender at each level of the organisation. I'm not aware that we look at elected members at all in that way, but certainly for employees, that's how we do it. That's published annually. That's why it's not mentioned in here, but maybe in future I should mention that fact in this report. That might be a good idea. In terms of the car parks at Bakewell and Harvestidge, I am aware that this is an issue across the country, and it's quite a live debate about the use of telephones for booking parking and so on. I will certainly, with Steve's nod, have a look historically at the EIAs that were done in that process, because I don't think I was in post at that point. I can certainly look back into that and pick that up in terms of consultation, again, with the approval of Steve and other colleagues, if that's something that we need to do. Did you want to?
Just to come in and just add that the payment by phone is an additional facility that's offered. So the car park review that was done before had the payment method, which at the time was just by cash, but since then we've implemented the offer of an additional one by card, and more recently one by phone. So it shouldn't be the only option, it's an additional one to provide more options and methods to pay.
Okay, on item 3, Serco, that we are working with them currently to get the consultation out. We have got draft questions, and they have come to me, colleagues that are working directly with Serco, to make sure that equality issues are covered. And I did hear today that they're also working on the GDPR issues that would be involved in consultation. We are asking for sensitive data, and sensitive data includes whether you're disabled or not. If we do the consultation with residents about waste, it's useful to know if we have people with disabilities, because we need to be able to identify if there's a trend for people with disabilities to perhaps have more issues, or maybe actually have less complaints from people with disabilities. And that's why we're asking for the sensitive data. So that consultation has stalled, but it's very close to coming out. Hopefully that reassures you a little bit. And with the Bakewell Farmers Market stall holders, I think that seems like a reasonable request. So I'll pick that up with Steve nodding at me. So I'll pick that up with colleagues that will be running that consultation later on, and we'll be reporting back on that in due course. Is that sufficient, Councillor O'Brien? Does that answer you?
Yeah, that was very helpful. What I would say on the use of mobile app on parking, I accept it's an additional option. I am reflecting the concerns and complaints that have come to me that a certain generation do, for whatever reason, who try to use it and can't and what have you. That it does appear to be a genuine concern that it embarrasses a good proportion of people who can't use it quickly, don't know how to do it at all. So I think it is a genuine issue which I think should be looked at.
Yeah, I've made note of that.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Chair. On the point about us councillors, perhaps it might be prudent, Elizabeth, if you check with other authorities to see if they carry out
Yes, I guess.
EAs on their
Yeah.
councillors. I think that'd be a good move first.
Yeah.
See if
Get
we've got
some
anybody
data. Yeah.
lined up for that. I think, like the organisational update, this report graphically shows the amount of work that's been carried out by this authority. And despite the pandemic, the good work that's been done and the amount achieved. But I do have a couple of questions, Steve. Just bear with me because my screen's gone off. And I think it's page 29. So it's for Steve and Elizabeth if you wish, but I know it's more Steve's domain. So objective 3, promote housing development that meets the needs of the present and future population of the district. Well, as you know, where this is coming from, last night's local plan workshop. And objective 4, seek to attract investment that supports the local economy, including the provision of jobs for younger people. For those of you that are not at that local plan workshop last night, we had BDP consultants with us, and we're starting a journey with them. And one matter I raised was that, and it was from a question, I think it was from you, Peter, actually, about larger companies' investment in this area, something which we've never seemed to really achieve in any great success. We're classed as a low-wage economy, and it was mentioned that the south of us is a much higher wage economy, and that's, of course, because of Rolls-Royce, Toyota, and so forth. So I just wonder what, if this is going to include in the corporate plan, Steve, and I think it should, but how we're going to attract investment that supports the local economy, because we can't just keep building these houses. One criticism I've had all the way through this local plan is that it's always been about numbers. Just get the houses built, get the houses built, no money for infrastructure, no sort of thought about anything else on the environment. So I think this time with BDP, we've got to work smarter. And so I'd like to see how we're going to achieve attracting bigger businesses into Derbyshire Dales. And align that with the fact that we're now moving into a mayoral combined authority era in 2024. So I think there's some twin tracking required here.
Chairman, just to respond to that question, which was, I think, raised by Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Purdy last night. I suppose the simple answer, the only way we're going to attract big businesses is if we can provide big sites. The problem we've had in the Derbyshire Dales is we haven't had any sites for big businesses to invest in. We've got lots of thriving smaller businesses that are doing really, really well, and we've been very good at promoting them, as you know. But bigger businesses coming in, we've had no sites available for them. But the work that the council is doing and has done over the last few years is hopefully going to improve that by creating new business employment sites. I think the point about employment and housing going together is a good one, and we have a number of our big housing sites are in fact mixed use sites. So as well as the housing portion, they've also got an employment allocation as part of that as well. Ashbourne is probably the biggest example, but there's other examples in Matlock and Wirksworth as well. So we do have an opportunity with the as the local plan gets implemented in the coming years, with those mixed-use sites and those employment sites to bring in those bigger companies and well, not necessarily bigger companies, but better-paying companies that will hopefully help younger and older people in the district to have better-paid jobs.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Flitter.
Thank you, Chair. These reports are rather difficult for me to read, but I look at the two appendices at the end, 3 and 4, which tell us the way that we're going to go in the future. Two actually stood out to me. First is on Appendix 3 on 71, and it talks about working with partners and communities to maintain high level of community safety, and that's a real issue at the moment. And we're looking at physical equipment. We're talking about ASBOs. We're talking about holding events. But what we're not doing is trying to influence the housing associations in their lettings policy. And I wondered where we go with that. I was horrified a couple of months ago. I went on a street meet with platform housing, and I was asking certain questions, and I was quite bluntly told that officers were not allowed to communicate or consider complaints from councillors. And that really made me uptight at that particular time. Now, things have got a little better since then, because I try and get to as many street meets as I can and bring up issues, you know, affecting that. But the one problem on community safety that I find at the moment is the lettings policy are now changing, because there used to be an area of housing for elderly residents. Now they're taken up by and intermingled with much younger residents, and some which are causing concern on community safety. I know that I can cite 2 or 3 places in Matlock where the police are regular attendees for one reason or another, and the elder generation are afraid to go out at night. Once it falls dark, they're closing the windows, locking the doors, they don't go out. That, to me, is wrong. And yet, we don't seem to have anywhere where we can, I suppose the housing authorities are partners in our discussions, and I'd like to know where we can, hopefully, persuade them to look at their letting. I know in one respect it's equality, but in another respect it's community safety, and one is fighting against the other, and I'd like to see some compromise and something really done about that. And the other thing Councillor O'Brien just mentioned about on Appendix 4, talking to and consulting with traders on Bakewell Market. We have other markets in Derbyshire Dales. They need help. They are struggling. And I've been saying for long enough, we should be talking to everybody. And I would hope, even whether the council's got an involvement or whether they haven't, and the market traders, say in Matlock, market traders run their own market, we still should be talking to them to see how this council can help. I know they've got issues at the moment, and I'm trying to highlight something at a future meeting about that. But let's please don't just say Bakewell. Let's look at market traders, as we should have done a number of years ago, because, you know, I believe that since we had the Saturday market come to Matlock, footfall has definitely risen. I know we've had a complaint, I was told by a member of staff, from one business, but that is what you'll always get. If you haven't got the right product at the right price, you're not going to sell your product. That's a fact of business. But it has increased footfall, and I would like to see them helped and expanded so that it gives Derbyshire Dales a bit of credibility. Thank you.
Liz or Steve, do you want to respond to that, or shall we move on?
I can respond briefly in terms of the housing point. I'll feed that one to Rob Coggins, Councillor Flitter. I think, and it's a long time since I've been involved in community safety, but at the time there was engagement with the then social housing body, Dales Housing. So it'll be interesting to see whether that's still there or not. I suspect our community development teams do talk to the wider market traders in terms of licensing and so on, but we'll check up on that as well.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to respond to Councillor Flitter's points about housing, if I may. When I first became a councillor, we had awful problems on the Hawthorne Drive estate with exactly what you're talking about, putting young offenders into a situation with the elderly. And it got so bad, there was actually fights by groups of from Wirksworth and groups from Cromford, and eventually 16 were arrested and taken to court. But the judge released them, and so they were called the Untouchables. So it's not new. About 8 months ago, Rob Coggins will help me better with this, but Rob organised a meeting with the Chief Exec of Platform and some of their directors here at the Town Hall. So, as Steve said, I'm happy to pick that up with Rob again, because at that meeting I did say one of the disconnects we've suffered is the fact that we had councillors on the Dales Housing Board, and now we don't have that connect, and therefore there are too many complaints coming around the district from such as what you're saying, what I've suffered as well before, that they are putting individuals who shouldn't be put in within that kind of elderly community. It's bad. Insofar as groups mixing on the street, well, we had this in my day and the police, it depends what they're doing. But I'm happy to pick up, Steve, whatever problems you've got and put it through Eleanor, and we can discuss it on the Derbyshire Dales Community Safety Committee.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you. I was listening with interest to what Steve was saying. I've had recent involvement with platform housing, and I couldn't help but be aware of the level of bureaucracy that you now have to go through in order to actually act on behalf of a resident. Even if that resident has vulnerabilities in the sense that he or she needs support and someone like a council representative to act on their behalf. We used to have very, very productive meetings on community safety in a particular forum that no doubt Steve will remember, because it was chaired by a sort of favourite councillor, certainly of mine, probably him too, called Janet Goodison, a very effective councillor. But the forum itself really was superb in the way that it would produce effective action. I mean, my plea would be to try to restore something of that forum again, so that there is a dialogue going on, not only with the major housing group, but also with community safety officers and indeed our own officers too, so that when there are concerns arising within a community, they can be dealt with in a sort of cross departmental way, and some sort of solutions tried. I think it's time that we had that brought back again. I don't know what you feel,
Chair,
Gary. You probably remember it too.
As I've said, Councillor Flitter, I will commit to following this up with Rob and with the Chief Executive. And I firmly believe that engagement is very productive. And I did get an offer from the Chief Exec that if we want any assistance, then please ask. So we'll ask.
Okay, Councillor Hobson.
Yeah, responding to Councillor Flitter and Councillor Ratcliffe. Councillor Purdy chairs the Derbyshire Dales Community Safety Partnership, and I attend also. There are representatives from Jerome from Platform Housing does come along with Elena Greenwood and police, fire, and our officers, and it's working very well. So I'm sure any sort of specific issues I've had, they've been most helpful with. So I just think we need to find some way of getting some effective dialogue for councillors. So we'll certainly raise that.
Thank you, Gary, for taking that on board. Any more questions? Right, I'll move to the debate. No debate. Somebody like to move it? All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 7, complaints annual report 21-22. That's you, James.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, this is an information report detailing the Council's performance in respect of complaints during the 2021-22 financial year. The report details complaints submitted to the Council, those matters raised with the local government ombudsman, and complaints alleging breaches of the Code of Conduct by district councillors and parish councillors in the Derbyshire Dales. I'm going to work on the basis that you've all read the report in detail, so I'm going to just draw out some headlines to assist your consideration of the report tonight. So there were 221 complaints received in total in 2021-22, and that compares to 135 complaints in 2020-21. It won't come as any surprise that a large increase in complaints is attributable to the failings in relation to the delivery of the waste contract by Serco. I think at this point, I'd probably just ask members to reflect on the impact that would have had on the waste team in particular in responding to those complaints at the same time as trying to get the service back up and running. So I know Alan Graham reflected on that in his independent review. Members refer to that in the council meeting where that was considered, but it's worth drawing out the impact of that again for members just to take into account the impact of that on that particular team. Moving on then, of the 221 complaints received, 194 were resolved at stage 1. 23 were resolved at stage 2 and 4 progressed to stage 3. Compared to 2020-21, I think it's fair to say that we are addressing and resolving complaints earlier and faster than in the previous year. So that's a positive, although we recognise there's always room for improvements. Moving on to the local government ombudsman, they undertook 2 detailed investigations into complaints against the council during 21-22 and didn't uphold either complaint. By way of comparison, in 2020-21, the ombudsman investigated 1 complaint which is upheld. So it's not really a good comparison to look at what's been looked at by the ombudsman and what they've done, because the statistics vary violently. It was 100% upheld against the council for the 1 complaint that the LGO investigated in 2020-21. Moving on then to member code of conduct complaints, there were 12 formal complaints submitted in 2021-22 alleging 13 breaches of the code by district councillors and 12 breaches by parish councillors. As the report states, all of these complaints were resolved at the initial assessment stage with either no action required or recommendations from myself as the monitoring officer to remedy or learn from the complaint. The number of complaints alleging breaches of the code was higher than in 2021. The report also sets out the financial implications of code of conduct complaints and refers to the opportunity cost of dealing with those complaints. Effectively, the opportunity cost is my time, which, as you'll appreciate, isn't cheap. So an approximation has been given to members in terms of the impact of complaints there, and it's estimated that each complaint costs about £475 if it's dealt with at initial assessment stage. If it goes to investigations, the report sets out, then those costs increase significantly higher. You'll note that we've actually prevented any complaints going to investigation in 2021-22, and that's something that we hope to continue to avoid incurring costs, and also because we believe we have the ability in-house to deal with those issues requiring investigation. So looking to the future, and this is set out in the options considered part of the report, we're currently working on a customer access strategy, which will come to full council later in the year, but I also intend to hold a workshop on the customer access strategy and get members' views on it before we reach that final decision point on it. The intention of that in terms of complaints will be to embed good practice that we've established and look at how we respond to customers' requirements and learn from complaints to improve the services that we offer and the way in which we engage with customers. We've also included a provision in this report about recording compliments, which we don't currently do. We know anecdotally that we get a lot of compliments from members of the public about the quality of the services that the district council provides. So I think in terms of this report in future, it would be helpful for you to probably compare the number of complaints that are received in relation to the number of compliments that are received, and that might actually give a much favourable position. That said, complaints are important and they are an opportunity for the organisation to learn. Mistakes often lead to greater learning than anything else. So it is important that we actually look at what we are doing. Are we doing it well? How can we improve? Are there training needs for officers? Is it a policy issue that might potentially have created that? We need to get better at understanding what's caused the complaint. So that's something that we'll reflect in future reports. But I think, Chair, I've probably covered everything there. So as it's an information report, I'll be happy to take any questions that members may have.
Cheers, James. Councillor Purdy.
Thanks, James. Well, I'm pleased to hear that you're including compliments and or commendations or kind words whoever seem to record the complaints. And that leads me to ask how we define a complaint as an organisation, because I'm regularly getting complaints about the travellers, as I'm sure other officers and members are. So I had a complaint that started off with complaint, and I passed it on, and then the gentleman wrote back to me and said, I don't want to complain. I said, well, I have to tell you your initial word is complaint, so I passed it on to the monitoring officer, but I got in trouble then because he didn't want to make a complaint. So where do we draw that line?
Ratcliffe.
Oh, thank you, Chair. No, I do so agree with you, by the way, James, over this matter of compliments. I thought I was misreading, actually, in paragraph 3. I thought it was a spelling that it was, and then I did realise it really is compliments you're talking about. I mean, it is so important for staff morale. And I have to say, I always try to make a conscious effort of trying to pass on, thanks whenever it's the due, and hope that it gets back to the staff involved. One of the things that interested me, by the way, James, and I don't suppose you would be able to give me the information, was the sort of hidden detail, particularly in the issues that were complained about within community and environmental services, toilets, for instance, which was something that I was, along with my dear departed colleague Joyce Pawley, active in trying to see that we didn't have the level of closures and toilets across the district that unfortunately did come to pass. But, you wonder there, these complaints, were they about toilets not being open when they should be open, or broken equipment inside? It's that sort of detail that might be of interest, because it's something then that we as councillors can latch on to and try to push for a rectification, or at least give support to the officers who are dealing with it, rather than leaving it just to them to shoulder. And again, within the terms of customer relations. And again, car parks, of course. I mean, the first thing that leapt out to me there, these car park complaints, were any of them about that, what we were talking about earlier, about the inability to use the machines, which incidentally, I will say at this stage, is something that gets constantly mentioned to me by a friend who suffers, that's the wrong word, actually has cerebral palsy, and his dexterity is extremely limited, and trying to use these new car parking payment things is an absolute nightmare, though it has been suggested that perhaps he has a yearly pass. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, James.
You'd like to respond, James?
Yeah, and just to pick up on that, no, I don't have the detail of everything, but I could get that for you, so I'll come back to you outside the meeting if that's all right, Councillor Ratcliffe. Just to come back to Councillor Purdy's question in terms of what we mean by a complaint. So the Council's previously defined a complaint as an expression of dissatisfaction about our action or lack of action, or dissatisfaction about the standard of service we provided. So, for example, problems accessing services, failure to provide a response within agreed timescales, behaviour of our staff, standard or quality of service provided, and failure to keep your personal data safe. This information is on the website. But what we will be looking to do as part of the customer access strategy is to embed that within there, so members will have the opportunity to review the provisions of what is, a complaint and what isn't. And it's probably more important actually to define what doesn't constitute a complaint. Recently, I've had to deal with a number of complaints about decisions of the planning committee, which aren't matters that we can actually remedy and we can't address. What I can look at is questions around procedure and things like that, but I can't actually criticise or validate a decision that members have taken in committee. So it's important to be clear around what is something that we can look at and what we can't.
Councillor Flitter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, if you look at complaints in one respect, if it's about service, then the council, it's highlighted that we can do something about it, rectify it and improve that service to local people. On the other side, I take James's words that we need a better understanding of the complaints. And how do we link that with something we see on a lot of decisions, that there is a lack of evidence? Now, putting lack of evidence on something really infuriates the public. And it's always borne to me that they look after themselves. It's not taken seriously. Well, I'm sure that James takes everything seriously that comes forward, but it's a cover-up out there in the public. They say it's a cover-up. Everybody professionally looks after themselves. It doesn't matter what profession you're in. I hear it a lot of the times. So how are we going to remedy that better understanding connected with that lack of evidence? The second part of the report, which relates to code of conduct and members, that really, really disappoints me. I've been on this council some years now, and this is the worst 4 years on member against member that I've ever known. And I'm not laying blame to anybody. I'm not criticising the enthusiasm of some of the members. But really and truly, members have got to get to grips, because that does this council no credit at all. And it's horrified me. It's made these last 4 years for me think to myself, do I really want to be a part of that council? So I think every single councillor needs to look at the way they portray themselves, and it should be one of respect. I was brought up, I mean, we're all here for the same reason. We all may have different ways of achieving that goal, but at the end of the day, we're all people serving our communities. And I want that message going out really strongly to everybody on this council, because I don't want to see another report with so many of these that I can relate to. So please, let's try and give that respect to every single member on this council.
Chair, if I can just respond to Councillor Flitter's question about, I guess the point was about the integrity of the responses provided to complaints. We're required to abide by a code of conduct. We're required to work to the same standards that members are in terms of integrity. But I guess for me, the issue here is around the transparency of processes, be that in the way that decisions are made or services are delivered, and how we justify the reasons for service delivery or service failure. And perhaps there's a bit more thinking to be done about how we engage, and I think that's where the customer access strategy might provide an opportunity. So I'd welcome members' thoughts and comments on that when we have a workshop on it, and also in the debate at council when it comes forward for adoption there. Just on the second point you made, Councillor Flitter, about the code of conduct complaints, there were some member complaints in there, but the majority of them were members of the public complaining about members. more often than not, it will relate to decisions of the council, and they've seen somebody saying something they might well disagree with it. I think I would much prefer not to be dealing with as many code of conduct complaints. It's not a good state of affairs. But if we were to compare the volume of complaints that we've had to other local authorities, we're not out of kilter. I think you're absolutely right. Historically, this council's had a very good or very low level of complaints levelled against members. That has changed. I think the political balance of this council has changed, and it's inevitable that you do get different views expressed, and people take offence to it and they'll put a complaint in. The test for me is actually how many breaches have been confirmed, or where we consider there to be an issue. And there have been very few cases where I've made any recommendations, and even where I have made a recommendation, there's not been a confirmed breach of the code. It's actually, we recognise that there's a potential issue here. We might want to reflect on behaviour. We might want to make an apology to actually demonstrate that we've learned and listened, to what the complaints had to say. So I think if we had lots of complaints going forward to investigation and we had findings that there were breaches of the code, that would be a real concern. But given where we are at the moment, like you, I'd love to see those numbers come down, but we don't have breaches or proven breaches. So that's a good sign, I think.
Thank you, James. I'll move straight to the debate. Councillor Bryan, I beg your pardon.
So I had a procedural question, and I don't want this to appear facetious because I found this an interesting report, but I thought we'd taken a decision not to have reports for information, for noting, in order to save time.
Absolutely right, Councillor O'Brien. I was actually going to start my presentation by apologising for the fact that you'd agreed that you weren't going to do that anymore. One thing that I might do in future is actually suggest that this report goes to the scrutiny committee so that members can dig into the issues a bit deeper. Because I do think that it's actually the information below the complaints, the statistical information that's probably of more interest in identifying other opportunities for learning. So absolutely, Councillor O'Brien, you're right, and you won't see this one back here again, unfortunately.
Right. I'm looking for a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, members and ladies and gentlemen, for your input. Have a safe journey home.